Good evening and welcome to BronxTalk. Tonight's guest has been a New York State Assembly member since 1994. He's the chair of the New York State Assembly Committee on Codes and the secretary of the Bronx County Democratic Committee. We'll talk with him tonight about the state legislative session that was just completed, a look at his agenda for next session, and some important local district issues as well. Now, he doesn't know this. I haven't announced it to a lot of people. Tonight is his 31st appearance on BronxTalk, which puts you in a tie with, first of all, good evening to Assemblymember Jeffrey Dinowitz, which puts you in a tie with the former Borough President Ruben Diaz Jr., which I think he was here 31 times. So I, in honor of your being on the show the most times, I printed you a list of every program that you have been on.
Oh boy, wow.
So the first one was October 17th, 1995. And then, of course, the most recent is today. But then, I guess in last October, we did a political forum and you participated.
Well, thank you.
So that's my gift before we start the tough stuff.
I guess I'm going to have to overtake Ruben at some point.
Well, he's probably not going to be on for a while, and so you have a better chance. Anyway, nice to see you, Assembly Member. The legislative session, you told me privately beforehand that maybe it underachieved. What's your thoughts about what just happened in Albany?
We did get a number of good things done, but there were too many things I thought sort of left on the table. Not blaming anybody, but clearly there are things we need to get done that haven't been done. Big things, smaller things. And I would say, despite the fact that we passed some of my housing legislation, that maybe the biggest thing we didn't really get done was housing. Good cause eviction, creating more housing. There was just no agreement. And we're going to have to continue to work on it.
The agreement, was it based on political grounds? I mean, obviously Democrats have the majority in both houses and the governorship. Or is it really, even within each house and within Democrats, there's no unanimity on how to do it? Is it north, upstate, downstate? I mean, what is it?
It's a little bit of everything. Good cause eviction has pretty strong support within the city, among Democrats in general, although a good cause eviction can be extremely helpful out of the city. You know, we have so many people that are rent regulated, and good cause eviction really affects people who aren't rent regulated in terms of limiting their rents and giving them the right to stay in an apartment. But that was...
look, just to define the terms for the viewers, good cause eviction is basically to make sure that there are real legitimate reasons for evicting somebody before they get evicted.
Well, yeah, and you can't just throw somebody out because somebody else might want to pay double the rent.
You
can't
point.
Throw somebody out just because you don't like their looks or something. You can evict somebody if they're not paying their rent or if they're causing a lot of problems, if they're dealing drugs, if they're making huge amounts of noise all the time, if there are legitimate grounds, but not just because you want a better deal with somebody.
It's hard, just from a logic perspective, it's hard to imagine anybody would oppose that, but I know there's
there are plenty of people who
oppose it. Yeah, I know.
it.
You fortunately or unfortunately, you have to work on that. What's next for housing? When you get back to Albany, what would you champion? Is good cause eviction at the top, and are there other issues?
Well, for me, that's certainly at the top because I have many people who would be impacted by it. The people who are not rent regulated, the people who have free market rents. And it's not just the eviction part of the bill. The legislation would also limit rent increases. Now, of course, that would be something to be negotiated, but it would limit it to a certain amount, maybe not as favorable as the people who have rent protection right now, but there are people who are getting $500 rent increases, getting their rents doubled. Things are totally out of control right now. And a lot of people are leaving New York, not because they're running away from New York, but because they can't afford to stay here. You know, when they talk about we need to build 800,000 units of housing in New York State, I'm not saying we don't need to build a lot of housing, but what I am saying is that I believe the greater crisis is not a housing shortage, it's an affordability crisis. We have tens of thousands of empty units right now.
What becomes a formula to do that? What becomes a formula to build affordable housing? Is it a 421A tax exemption to allow, and I'm not saying yes or no, I know it's another controversial issue, to allow developers to get tax credits for doing just that kind of thing? Or what's next?
I've never been a big supporter of 421A, to say the least, but I could see supporting a program like that if we got a good deal. But in a typical building, I know buildings right in our own neighborhood where there's a building on Riverdale Avenue. They built it. I don't know how many units it had, but under the arrangement with 421A, I think 2 of the apartments were going to be affordable. And I put that in very big quotes.
So it doesn't really have enough teeth. They got an exemption and then didn't provide.
We don't get enough, and we don't get enough affordability.
You had a bill that you just informed me that it passed. I was aware that it only passed the Assembly. Is the 4-year rule? What I'm sure you're proud of that. You've been a housing champion for a while.
Right. I mean, some of the bills that I'm most proud of laws are housing related, like the eviction moratorium, for example. But we had constituents who came to us some years ago who, there was no question, the landlord lied or made a mistake, but we know what happens, about the rent history. So they were overcharging tenants, but under the law, you were only allowed to look back a certain 4 years. So I put in legislation to eliminate that, or at least make it a longer period of time. And in 2019, when we passed the HSTPA, the Housing Stability, the huge rent reform that we passed, that bill was incorporated into it. But when landlords challenged it in court, they won a partial victory in a case called Regina Metropolitan versus DHCR. That's a state housing agency. And it overturned the retroactivity piece of that legislation. So we passed, I put in a bill to address that issue without violating the court ruling. I want to make sure that a tenant, they can get the rent history, and if the landlord falsified, put in the wrong amounts, and so that meant that subsequent rent increases will be based on an inflated amount, creating huge windfall profits, that there was a way to deal with that. No one should profit from committing fraud, or even if it's just a simple mistake, they still shouldn't profit from it.
One of the things I thought this was most interesting that did pass is the non-compete agreements, and that we talked about it with some of your colleagues a week or two ago. And I just think it's very interesting because I know many people, especially in broadcasting, who sign an agreement or sign a contract, and then if they leave whatever that job is for like 3 years, they can't work for another network, and it kind of and that's at one level. But even if you work at a fast food house, a lot of times they're non-competes.
Well, we passed this bill. It was actually based in part on legislation that I had introduced several years ago, which focused on people who worked at McDonald's, for example. If you work at McDonald's and you leave, you should be able to work at another McDonald's or at a Burger King or a Wendy's. But non-compete agreements really tie people's hands in an unfair way. And very often, if you're an employee, you don't have equal bargaining position. So these non-compete clauses were really a problem.
And I think nowadays people need jobs, and the way it is, you could be laid off or whatever it is. And so I think it makes sense. I want to ask you about something else I didn't get to ask your colleagues when they were on. the campaign finance laws were changed, and people noticed, and you and I had dialogue years ago about bills that were passed at 2 a.m. at the last minute. And so matching funds for big money donations got an increase and a decrease for smaller donations. Sounds to me like it's upside down. Do I have it wrong?
Well, let me explain. A few years ago, we passed campaign finance reform for New York State, for statewide offices and for legislators. And it created a system of matching funds in certain cases. So what the original law did was if you get enough contributors from your own district and it adds up to enough, then you're eligible for matching funds only for in-district contributions. What the legislature did a few weeks ago was we changed that somewhat, and I don't think it's going to make a big difference. So
would it then encourage big donors versus smaller donors?
Not really. I'll tell you why. So previously, what it said was that for Assembly, the maximum donation for a campaign was $3,000, and it said if somebody gives you $250 or less, then there's matching funds, and it struck a lot of people as odd. So if somebody gives you $300, none of it's matchable. Somebody gives you $500, none of it's matchable. In the city council, they match the first $175 of a donation. But for the legislature, the law wasn't that you match the first $250, was that you only match it if it's $250 or under. And so that just seemed to be bizarre.
I see what you're saying is that they extended the matching funds, and then, of course, that would suggest that people who spend more will get
right. But
the benefit
like,
of the match.
I'll take, like in my case, most of the contributions I get from people within the district, most of them aren't more than $250 anyway. I mean, I get some, no question, but the overwhelming, maybe 90% of the campaign contributions
the
I
basic
get,
constituent money.
yeah, and it's $250. It's usually like less than $100 even. So, for me, I don't think it's going to make a big difference one way or the other.
Despite the fact that you've been on our program so many times, we haven't had a chance to talk on the air about the state budget. There was a charter school compromise in the state budget. Governor wanted 100 charters. We ended up with 22 overall in the additional in the state, and 14 new ones in New York City. That was part of the ongoing conflict between public and private. You now have in your district a rather large controversy over a proposed charter school. Why don't you review that for us? It's just for people who don't know, it's proposed for 306 West 232nd Street, and it is the International Leadership Charter School. You've been opposed.
Absolutely. And my opposition really has nothing to do with the fact that it's a charter school. There is a charter school on West 231st and Riverdale Avenue called the International Leadership Charter High School. And I have nothing bad to say about the school, but they are going to be building, a developer's building a building on West 232nd Street between Tibbet and Irwin Avenue, a very quiet, tiny block. They're building a building on a site where a single-family home stood until a few years ago. They're going to put up a 7-story building, and it's going to be the middle school component of that charter school, and it's going to have up to 300 kids a day coming to that location. That's 300 cars or buses.
So your issue, location is your issue. Let's say they said we're going to put a traditional public school up there and fill the seats because ease overcrowding in the community. Is it the charter school, the location? What is it that bothers you? Or because I'm always saying, well, we need more seats and people want more choice.
Well, number one, people have lots of choice, but number two, it's not the fact that it's a charter school. If it was a regular public school, I still would not think that that's good, because that site, if you draw a circle, a 2 or 3 block circle around that site, within a 2 or 3 block radius of that site, there are 13 schools right now. 13 schools, I'm not exaggerating. So there's thousands, well over 10,000 kids pouring into the area every day, and Many of the kids come by car. Their parents drive them. The people are double parked, triple parked.
So where is it at now? Is it as of right, and they're going to build, and there's going to have to be some court thing to stop it, or is it still some decisions?
Well, the building is going up as of right, and the developer owns another building on Collier Avenue where there's also a charter school where, according to the UFT, the school is paying the developer $250,000, not a year, a month in rent. So who knows what kind of arrangements the developer made with this particular charter school.
Is there any negotiation left, or at this point?
The leader of the charter school has refused to meet with the community, refused to meet with the elected officials, refused to meet with the community board or local residents.
Another school, Visitation, was taken down over there on 240th Street. There's been a lot of controversy about the housing development that's planned there. I think many people are concerned about single units, small units that will not encourage families to.
As am I.
And what's to happen there, or is it going to happen, or is there some other fight?
When we knew Visitation was leaving both the church and the school, which was sad and unfortunate, I immediately reached out to the School Construction Authority and to the Archdiocese because I envisioned a school, an elementary school, on that whole site. What ended up happening is the Archdiocese, I guess, made their deals with school construction and with Tishman Spire. So on that site, it's going to be a little bitty school. I shouldn't say little. It's going to be like 600 to 700 students with a
That's not small, yeah.
Well, look, compared to the site, it's very small. And there'll be a playground on the roof. Of course, there's no other space because they're not going to get that much space. And most of the site will be taken up by 340 units of housing. Now, which I think is a little excessive, but I don't really have an objection to that. But of the 340 units, 70% will either be zero bedrooms, or one bedrooms. Only 30% will be twos or threes. Not a way to encourage families to move in.
Is it a done deal? Is there more negotiation to happen?
Well, I mean, we're hoping. I know myself, Councilman Eric Dinowitz, the community board, others have been pushing the developer to reconfigure at least the distribution. Instead of 340 units, maybe there can be a smaller number with a greater number of larger units. You want families to move in.
I'll tell you, I want families to move in, but I want kids to have a schoolyard, and so maybe they'll go across the street to Van Cortlandt Park.
They're not going to have a schoolyard, not really.
Well, then they'll go across the street to the park.
That's a shame.
I think it's important for kids. That's my personal point. One last development thing in your community. Manhattan College sold a building to Stag, which is in a kind of an interesting spot on I guess 238th Street up the steps as you go up the hill. Okay, not okay. There's some concern from the community.
Well, the concern is that Stag will ultimately turn this into a homeless shelter, and I don't believe that's a great location for a homeless shelter. I mean, let me put it even more strongly. There should not be a homeless shelter in that building. That was not the understanding that Manhattan College left with people. Stag doesn't have a great record. I mean, they've pulled bait and switches.
Yeah, bait and switch. They tell you when. But a lot was said about the facility that was put on, I think it's 234th Street and Broadway, which actually turned out well, and I think they even won an award by the way they were welcomed by the community. What's the difference, just for example, between that project and the potential facility up there?
Well, on 230, it's actually at 237th and Broadway, right near the police station. The issue I had with it, again, was the bait and switch. It was advertised online.
237th, okay,
yeah,
sorry.
It was advertised online as market rate housing, and then suddenly a not-for-profit comes in, Stag makes a deal with them, and it's going to be a homeless shelter. And I think the homeless shelter has been perfectly fine. It's worked out. I haven't heard of any negativity about it, and I was never against the concept. What I objected to was the community kind of being lied to. I don't like that.
And not being included. We're actually, next week, we're going to do a show with a couple of community boards in the Bronx that are fighting over just this very thing about, and it's a difficult thing because the numbers came out that the city now has more than 100,000 people in shelters. I mean, I have some empathy for the mayor trying to figure out what to do.
Of course.
I want to
Of
just
course.
change gears and ask you just in general about politics and progressive politics. You've been on the show for 29 years. Your legislative record is strong on women's rights, on the environment, on guns. I mean, you've been a champion on all those, many so-called left-leaning issues. Anyone from the outside who said, well, who is Jeff Dinowitz? They would look and they say, oh, well, he's a liberal, he's a progressive, he's a left-leaning politician. I won't use some of the other stereotypes that they use. But you've been challenged by opponents who say you're part of the establishment and the time is for you to go in favor of progressive candidates. You supported a challenger to as progressive a state senator as we could have in Gustavo Rivera. Where are you at? How do you view your political status and who you relate to?
I take the positions that I believe are right. I think most people would consider those on almost everything to be what's now known as progressive. And in the old days,
well,
it was
this is
called
why
liberal.
I brought it up. I mean, evaluating your legislative record would say, well, this is a progressive politician. But the progressive people are saying, you got to go.
Well, I mean, when people want to run for office, they say that it's time for a change. They say that the person who's there now has got to go. I would say it's time for a change. Who's brought more change to Albany or to the district in terms of the issues I've backed than me? So, people run, they say, here's something funny. So there was a candidates forum last year. I was there and the person who ran against me was there as well. And somebody said to her something along those lines, Jeff has been very progressive. Like, what's the difference between the two of you? And she was only able to cite one bill, literally one bill, where we disagreed. And it had to do with parole reform. We didn't even disagree that much. The point being that people can say that they're challenging somebody who's been there too long, who's part of the establishment, who's, whatever. But the truth is, it's just a matter of political ambition. Say, I want to be an assembly member, and he's there now, and I want to replace that.
Do you adopt the word for yourself, progressive, or you discount all the labels, you don't think about it?
You know what I say? Label schmabel. I've never, I don't call myself.
That's the Bronx in you coming out.
I guess 99% of people would call me progressive, but I never label myself. I look at every issue individually, and I know how I feel about things. And I would say that the person who challenged me, I'm sure she agreed with me on every issue. She just didn't agree with me that I should be there instead of her.
You wrote in a letter in the Riverdale Press saying that basically, on some levels, it came down to defund the police, that you don't like that phrase. I always thought that the phrase was badly applied, that the idea is if there are crime-fighting agendas that can work to ease the job, I guess any budgetary expert would think that.
That's true. But at the time when defund the police was coined, was popularized, the people who supported it wanted massive cuts to the police. And they weren't talking at that time, let's move the money over to, mental health, social. They wanted to cut the police because they don't like the police. And I don't agree with everything the police do, not by a long shot, but do I want to cut their budgets? Well, no, I don't want to lose police in my precincts.
But you've been a champion of the community centers. I mean, you had an office at the Marshall Montefiore Community Center. But that money should come from somewhere else and don't touch the police budget. That's what, in essence, what you're saying.
If there's inefficiencies in the police budget, if there are things that don't belong there, fine, but I would suggest that the elected officials who want to cut the police budget, they should lose police coverage in their neighborhoods, but not in the ones that I represent, because my constituents don't want that.
Let's just talk about congestion pricing. Mm-hmm. It's out there. It looks like it's coming in 2024. New York City is ready to build the nation's first, congestion pricing program. Collecting billions for mass transit. You certainly have supported that over the years. What do you think?
I mean, I was never a big advocate of congestion pricing at the time, but when push came to shove, it was part of a budget deal, and I do think there are going to be many positive things that come out of congestion pricing, but I don't intend to drive my car into Manhattan and have to pay whatever it is, $16.
So then you would take the train,
I would,
which is what the objective of this is, to get the cars off the street.
I went into Manhattan yesterday. I took the Metro North. I was going
Metro
into the
North,
Grand
whatever.
Central area. It was right there. It would have been kind of nutty for me to take my car there under the circumstances. It's going to be a major irritant to people, and I don't blame people for being upset about it. But it's coming. It's coming. And at least when we passed the budget, I was able to negotiate a bonus for our community, which I think will finally be implemented, that Bronxites who have Easy Pass will get an instant rebate on the Henry Hudson Bridge toll.
So that's a start. Oh, and one other thing, which definitely, before I forget, could this worsen a parking shortage at the edge of congestion zones? I mean, you've got 240
Absolutely.
2nd Street, and boy, I'll tell you, this is what Gary thinks. If there's some property you can get and you can build a parking garage at the end of the number 6 train, at the end of the D train, at the end of the number 2 train, do it, because people are going to want to do that and save themselves whatever they're saying.
There could be some issues.
It's real money. It's not like $275 for a train ride. It's like $20.
It's going to be hard for some people. I know Congressman Torres did something really great, which was that in reaction to what studies have shown, that the Bronx would actually be negatively impacted in terms of pollution, he's been able to bring in money, some of which will deal with the issue of the Cross Bronx Expressway, capping parts of it, but other things as well. So if there are going to be any negative impacts, then we got to get something in return.
We got about a minute left. I've got to ask you about, you seem to be part of the group that helped avoid an amalgamated gas shutdown. Without getting into a very large, complicated issue, the issue with both Amalgamated and Park Reservoir, they claim, is the fact that DHCR is what you used to call a rogue agency. You called the DEP a rogue agency years ago. Do you see DHCR that way?
I think I'm not sure I'd use the word rogue for them. I would say
I don't want to put words into your mouth.
I would say that they need to be much more supportive of the Amalgamated and various Mitchell-Lamas. And I've said to them, one of your jobs is to keep Mitchell-Lama housing going, and the Amalgamated is kind of like Mitchell-Lama. And I said, you're really
limited equity cost.
Yeah,
yes.
You're really not doing a very good job of that. We have to save these incredible.
Are you concerned about Mitchell-Lama? I know there are others in other parts of the Bronx.
I'm very
actually
concerned.
In the city council that are going to probably reach out to you folks.
Well, Cannon Heights is in my district. They are facing a serious financial crisis. They're a city supervised Mitchell-Lama, and the city, they have to step up to try to preserve this kind of housing. This is affordable housing. It's kept people in the city. This is middle class, working class, affordable housing.
Stable
and that's
housing.
their job. Before you build new housing, how about saving the housing we already have?
Assemblyman, we've covered a lot. Next time we'll cover more. It'll be visit number 32.
Oh, I'll be a record breaker then.
At that point. Listen, thank you for joining us. We booked the thing at the last minute, and it worked out great. We thank our producer, Rebecca Hemick, our director, Nick Marrero, the cast of thousands who work with us here in the studio. And guess what happens? Next week, we'll talk with a couple of Bronx community boards about attempts to site homeless shelters in their communities. Ongoing. Good night. See you then.